Hello and welcome to UnSound Effects, the series in which we're going to be looking at the Mandela Effect, of course. So this is the first in a series. I don't know how regularly we'll put them out, but fairly regularly, I think. We're going to tackle the words that many people, in fact, are saying have changed in the Bible. We're going to look at those. We're going to look at various aspects of the Mandela Effect. And we're going to come at this from my point of view, a Bible-believing Christian. I have faith in God and the Word of God. And we're going to just really try and go through some things, make sense of it all. Some of these videos will be more heavily scriptural dominated. Others will be looking at historical aspects or cultural aspects, all kinds of things that we can use to try and get to the bottom of some of these so-called changes in the Bible, and in particular the KJV. So we're going to start this series with the word corn. This is one of the contested words in the King James Version Bible. Now this is mainly coming from Americans, I've got to say, and I do believe there's a lot of language breakdown, language problems going on with the Mandela Effect, and people that are pulling the strings with this are using this lack of understanding to pursue an agenda. But what we're going to do today is we're going to completely examine corn, the biblical usage, the historical usage, and we're going to go through a little bit of British history, taking in such things as the corn exchange, the corn laws, etc. Okay, so when we do a search for corn in the Bible or in the KJV, it comes up 102 times in 94 verses, starting in Genesis 27 and going right through the Old Testament, into the New Testament, up to the first book of Timothy. So clearly something that we call corn was being used, and you'll see we've got the word corn in each of the four Gospels there: Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And I can't remember which of these verses are being contested for the word corn. But clearly, if you're going to contest one verse, then you're going to contest all 94 verses containing the word corn. So we'll just do a quick look. We'll do a quick look at Matthew 12 verse 1 and corn in or from the Greek, sporimos. It sounds like spores. So you'll see here again, it relates to spores, sporimos, sporemos. Just a really quick look at the word spore. Reproductive body in a flowerless plants corresponding to seeds of flowering ones. Latin spora, Greek spora, a seed, a sowing, seed time, related to sporus, scattered, dispersed, sporos, a sowing, sperine, to sow, scatter, to strew. See sprout, sporadic, sporadicus, scattered, dispersed, occurring in scattered instances, happening at intervals. Let's just have a look at sprout. The Old English sprutan, to sprout, a sprutan. Extended form of root, spur, to strew. You've got the word sperine again. To scatter, spora, scattering, sowing. Cornfield, corn. Fits for sowing, sown fields growing crops. That's what it means. So from the original Greek sporimos, it actually means crops that are grown, growing crops, sown fields. Sporimos, sporimos. A planted field, cornfield. And we also need to have a quick look at the Hebrew definition of corn. So we'll go from the first reference in the Bible, Genesis 27 verse 28. Corn dagan. Corn, wheat, corn flour. Outline of biblical usage. Wheat, cereal, grain, corn. So when you see the word corn in Old Testament, it's a generic term for any of these crops. You'll see here Whole Grains Council, and the first image they have on their homepage is a whole load of different grains, including corn and rice, various rice pulses, barley, oats, I guess that's oats, barley, and various other grains there. I'm not sure what all of these are. So what's important to be understood is that when the King James Version came out, it was a Bible for everyone. It was the first English language common Bible for everyone. If you think that the average medieval peasant or worker, churchgoer, child, adult, whoever, if you think they were well educated, well, they probably weren't. They probably had no idea of all these different words for grain, all the different types of grain. So the Bible, the King James Bible, was a modern Bible at the time. It was the transition from Old English into a totally modern Middle English. And the term corn would have been a generic term for grain. All grains, all wheat, all types of corn. But what we need to do is we need to prove the existence of the word corn in the contemporary modern language of 1611, the time of the King James Bible publication. You'll see some images here of the Bridgewater Corn Exchange, Bridgewater in Somerset in the West Country, the southwest of England. A very typical market town, medieval market town. It dates back to the 11th century. And the corn exchange itself, or the corn market itself, well, we'll find out where that dates back to now. But this is, what I'm showing you here is a typical corn exchange building. And we're going to have a look at corn exchanges in general and corn markets in general. So this is a Government UK blog, Companies House. Let's have a look at this. Registering companies since 1844. Some of our oldest companies revealed. Okay. And this article shows you how some of the older trades and industries began being taken over by limited companies in the 19th century, including many historical buildings. This really was the beginning of modernity, modernisation, putting the country's assets into the hands of private companies. Here's Sergeant's Inn Hall, Chancery Lane in London, the first Companies House location. And again, this is a contested word by the Mandela people, both the spelling and the word itself in the KJV. We're going to look at that at the end of the video, so we may well come back to this page at some point. So what I want to show you is the Cooper Corn Exchange in Fife, Scotland. This is a little article about how it was taken over in 1860 there. Here we have the Corn Exchange building itself. Now it was rebuilt in the mid-19th century. But this image shows you that it actually dates back at least until 1700. And just to explain the Corn Exchange in a little more detail, corn was traded in the towns, in the market towns all across the UK. So corn, various wheats, grains, crops were traded in the market towns by farmers, with local people buying up what supplies they could afford. And each market town had a location, had a market specifically for crops and related produce. And these were open air markets. Eventually, when the populations of the towns grew and the towns prospered, buildings were erected and they became not just trading places but storehouses also, where farmers could actually store their goods for trade, whereas previously they wouldn't have been able to do that in the open air. They would have only been able to bring whatever produce they could sell on the day. So these corn exchanges became actual corn stores as well as places of trade. So you'll see the Fife Corn Exchange here, dating back to at least 1700, with a tower. Most of these marketplaces had a tower or a spire to indicate to people coming into the towns from other places that this is where the markets were. Eventually, buildings were built onto these towers in the marketplaces to protect produce. Again, we are looking for the usage of the word corn in the English language around about the time of the King James Bible, where it needs to be from 1611 or before to be absolutely definite that the word corn was in the English language. A History of English Corn Laws from 1660 to 1846 by Donald Grove Barnes. A History of English Corn Laws from 1660 to 1846. So we've got the use of the word corn there in law by 1660. So this is going back a little bit further, before the Fife Corn Exchange. And I've looked at many of the corn exchanges. I can't actually find anything quite going back this far. But we have the English Corn Laws, which will give us some indication. Now, as we go back through this, this isn't the complete book, unfortunately. Some pages are omitted from this book preview. This is a real shame. But what we have on the contents page here is we have a synopsis of what each chapter contains. Chapter 1, the Corn Laws before 1660. So corn was actually regulated by law before 1660. I'll just read this synopsis quickly. The Corn Laws regulate the internal trade, exportation and importation, market development from the 12th to the 18th centuries. Interests of the consumer considered primary. History of the regulation of the internal trade. Governmental regulation of exportation, of importation. Underlying causes for the policies of the government in all three phases. Statutes of the three kinds of corn laws in 1660. And then as we go down, you'll see that unfortunately chapter 1 is not included in this preview, which is a real shame, because I'm sure that would give us a lot of great information there. And like I say, this book is available by the looks of it for purchase, I think. A History of English Corn Laws from 1660 to 1846 by Donald Grove Barnes. So as I said earlier, Bridgewater in Somerset still is a typical market town in England, but it's a town with a very rich history. This article, A Brief History of Bridgewater, Somerset by Tim Lambert. Now, Bridgewater began as a Saxon village in Somerset at the time of the Domesday Book, 1086. Bridgewater probably had a population of about 160. And I've read that figure in quite a few other articles as well. I'm just using this article because it's pretty concise, pretty in-depth as well. So Bridgewater in the Middle Ages, and you can see here how important it was as a trade town, as a market town and a trade town. It was also an important inland port, but until 1402 it was officially part of the port of Bristol. Wine from France was imported into Bridgewater. Other imports included cloth, grain, beans, peas and hides. This really does exemplify how important Bridgewater was. Early in the 13th century, a castle was built overlooking Bridgewater. In the middle of the town was the Corn Market, whose name later changed to Cornhill. And then, of course, much later on, the Corn Exchange was built as an indoor place of trade and storage. I'll leave this linked in the description for those that want to have a look at this. It is an interesting, in-depth but concise history of Bridgewater in Somerset, which was an important place because of the Civil War, of course. In 1642 came civil war between King and Parliament, and Bridgewater was a very important place. In fact, all of the West Country was an area where many of the decisive battles were fought in the English Civil War. Now, it could well be that Tim Lambert, the author of this article, could be using the term corn there in error, of course, going back to the 13th century. So what we really need to do is absolutely nail this word corn as being part of the contemporary modern English language at the time of the King James Bible. And so this is the song from Shakespeare's As You Like It. It was a lover and his lass with a hey and a ho and a hey nonny no, that o'er the green cornfield did pass. And of course, As You Like It, William Shakespeare, first performed in 1603. It was believed to be written in 1599 and first published 1623. So we've absolutely nailed the word corn used in contemporary literature and performance to before the publication of the King James Bible. And not only that, but we have one of the characters in the play, Duke Senior. Now, Duke is another word that has been contested, but we have it here in contemporary performance and literature from the time predating KJV publication. Now, this isn't the only time that the word corn appears in Shakespeare. It appears many times. We'll go more into depth into these words at some other point. We're going to go and look throughout this series at various words being contested in the KJV. And of course, if they appear in the English language before 1611, then there's no case for these words, word changes, phrase changes in the Mandela Effect. Here in the etymology dictionary usually gives us a good, or a rough idea at least, of when these words and phrases came into use. So let's have a quick look. Corn, it just means grain. Okay. Old English corn from the Proto-Germanic kuranam, small seed. Old Frisian and Old Saxon corn, grain, koren. The sense of the Old English word was grain, with the seed still in, as in barley corn, rather than a particular plant. So there we have it, which is what I was referencing earlier in this video, that it's a generic term talking of various strains of grain, wheat, barley, corn, etc. So just to come back now on the word sergeant, again we need to find contemporary references from around the time of the KJV, 1611, or before preferably, and this comes from Acts chapter 16. These are the two contested verses here. And when it was day, the magistrates sent the sergeants, saying, "Let those men go." Now you'll see how sergeant is spelled here, S-E-R-G-E-A-N-T. And verse 38, "And the sergeants told these words unto the magistrates, and they feared when they heard that they were Romans." Okay, so these are the two verses, verse 35 and verse 38, that the Mandela Effect people will tell you should not be in the KJV. So again, we go to the etymology first this time. Sergeant, there's the alternate spelling with a G. It means servant, okay, from Old French sergent, sergeant. Domestic, servant, valet, court official, soldier. From medieval Latin, serventium. I've got to say now, look, because I do understand there's a problem, maybe there's a problem with how some Americans understand English. English is made up from a whole load of languages. Okay, the word English comes from Engel, which was the language of the Angles. So when the Angles invaded, they brought Engel with them. There's a lot of Saxon or Germanic words in there, a lot of Norse, Germanic, a lot of French, a lot of Latin, and all these languages have come into English over a period of thousands of years. Okay. Originally, the language spoken in Great Britain was Gaelic, or more specifically Welsh. So there's a lot of connections between Welsh and English, but you also have Irish Gaelic and Scottish Gaelic or Pictish Gaelic. It's all mixed in there. It's all in the mix. Yeah, loads of different languages. Okay, so when you look for a word like this, sergeant, you are going to find that it will have French connections, pardon the pun, Latin, yeah, it will have some Germanic influences. Here it has Spanish equivalents, Italian equivalents, etc. Italian servente. Okay, so specific sense. Now this is where the Mandela Effect people are getting confused as well, because they're thinking of sergeant in the military sense, which is a military servant. It's the same word, it's just used in different contexts. Yeah, an officer whose duty is to enforce judgments of a tribunal or legislative body. So you've got to understand this is upholders of the law, not military soldiers as such, but those that policed the law. They're part of the legislative body to enforce judgments. They were the policemen of the day. And here in Middle English, which is basically what KJV is, Middle English, the alternative spelling sergeant with the J from the Old French was retained in Britain in special use as title of a superior order of barristers, one who serves the king in matters of law, from which common law judges were chosen. Okay, and you've got dates going back here, look. In the military sense, back to the 13th century. Non-commissioned military officer, first recorded 1540s. And again, you'll see here, special use as title of superior order of barristers from 1300s. And that's going way back in Middle English. That's almost going back to Old English. So when we go back to Acts chapter 16 and look at these verses again now, this makes perfect sense, yeah. And when it was day, the magistrates sent the sergeants. Yeah, the magistrates sent the sergeants. The sergeants were the upholders of the law. And I know in some of the modern Bibles it does say policemen. And people can't quite understand that. But these really were your very first policemen before all the modern day police forces. These were the upholders of the law. And this was, you know, they upheld judgments in courts. The magistrate sent the sergeant saying, let those men go. Yeah, so the magistrates were, another word, contested by the Mandela people. I'm not going to look into that today, but we will look at this at some point. And verse 38 as well, and the sergeants told these words unto the magistrates, and they feared when they heard that they were Romans. Okay, so that might put that a little bit more in context now, that we can understand exactly the meaning of this word sergeants. We've still got to find it in Middle English from around or before the time of the KJV publication. From Wikipedia, sergeant at law. A sergeant at law, commonly known simply as a sergeant, was a member of an order of barristers at the English bar. Okay, if we come down a little bit, the history of sergeants at law go back to within a century of the Norman Conquest. The Norman Conquest. That's why we have French words in the English language. Geoffrey Chaucer makes references to the sergeant in the Canterbury Tales, writing. The order certainly existed during the reign of Henry II from 1154 to 1189. He created a dozen sergeants and thus moved the order's existence out of the realm of conjecture and into the recorded fact. Okay, completely nailing these words to the King James Bible here, yeah. The Sergeant's Inn, which we looked at earlier in those images. This is in London, Chancery Lane. The Sergeant's Inn in Chancery Lane, the site of Old Sergeant's Inn, 1415 to 1910. Yeah, the Corporation of the City of London. And I mean, really, this is on Wikipedia. This is on Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. I know it's not the best website of all, but it's also in Etymology Dictionary. You'll probably find it in the Merriam-Webster's. You'll probably find it in any dictionary. Chaucer, Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is a collection of 24 stories that runs to over 17,000 lines, written in Middle English by Geoffrey Chaucer, originally published in 1478. And I mean, it really isn't difficult. It really isn't difficult to find words like sergeant and corn and duke and many other words in contemporary English literature from around or before the time of the authorised KJV. And just as an end note, because I know I know what the Mandela people are going to say. They're going to say everything's been changed. All your dictionaries, all your Bibles, all the digital Bibles, all the audio Bibles, all the commentaries, everything's been changed, right? Well, prove it. You have to prove this. Bring me evidence. Bring evidence before you come here to this channel making these claims. Bring me scholars of Shakespeare, academics, scholars of Shakespeare, scholars of Chaucer, and there are many that are going to say that the works of Shakespeare and Chaucer have been changed. You've got to bring these people to the table. You need to bring these people, you need to bring these academics, these scholars of English literature to the table to have this discussion. And if you can't do that, then don't bring that discussion to the table, because I'm showing you without a shadow of a doubt that these words were in the English language long before the 1611 KJV Bible. And it makes absolutely perfect sense that these words would be in the KJV Bible as a Bible translated into the modern English, contemporary modern English of the day. And that's all it is. And there's no changes. These words aren't strange. They would not have been strange words to people in 1611. They shouldn't be strange words to people now. They really shouldn't. Not to people that are claiming to be Christians and be well studied and well versed in Bible. These words should not appear strange. They're only appearing strange to people that do not know Middle English and the KJV Bible. And it's that simple.